Welcome, everybody. Thank you for introducing yourselves. It's great to see you all. As folks continue to filter in, we're going to get started. I'm pulling up some slides, and these will be available also in a Google link chat if you would like to follow along in there. These slides, much like last time, are a place where you can also share questions, reflections, notes, hopes, and ideas. And without further ado, I'm going to kick things right off because we have a very full agenda. We have some wonderful speakers lined up, and also you all joining us today in the room are just incredibly important people in the field advancing integrated floodplain management. We're super grateful that you've made time to join us today. So I'm not going to completely repeat my spiel from last time, but I am going to orient you to the slides, give you a welcome, and just make a couple of highlights for your information. So my name is Kas Guillozet. I'm with Bonneville Environmental Foundation. I have the honor and privilege of being able to support the Floodplains by Design program. This is being brought to you by Floodplains by Design in conjunction with many other partners. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague Hannah, as well as Brandon Parsons, who are core members of our team, and Carol McElroy, a consultant who has been invaluable. These are the same as last time. So if you were with us during webinar 1, the messaging remains the same. I did want to make a couple key highlights for you, however. So one, the first webinar provided some perspectives from the field. Why are we even gathering to talk about permitting? What efficiencies might be possible in the realm of feasibility within legal requirements, balancing needs and interests? The rescindment came up a few times, and that was explained a little bit by different speakers, but there was one key piece that is informing a lot of what we're hoping to touch on today, and that relates to no rise requirements. And others might emphasize this as well.
Oh, you know
but
what? I put it on full screen, and so I went to the audio settings and just turned the speakers all the way down. Oh gosh.
Wait a minute.
Anyway, I'm just
Oh. The dangers of Zoom. Thank you. We kind of elected to keep everybody in the room together because honestly, attendees are as VIPs as our distinguished speakers. So we might have some glitches, no problem. We'll roll with it. Thanks for your patience. But what I wanted to highlight was with the rescindment, there was a shift. Others can say more about this, and I want to invite our friends and colleagues at Fema, Ecology, and other local regulators to chat in any clarifications, to answer any questions that might come into the chat. This was one of the real strengths of last 2 weeks ago's meeting, was the vibrant chat and the support that we got from Fema and others in fielding questions, providing information links. So please keep that rolling. But with the rescindment came a shift from projects needing to demonstrate that they could come as close as practically possible to a no rise to what is now a no rise. And that provides a number of important shifts in what folks need to be thinking about and recording and reporting. It can slow processes, it can make them more expensive. We'll touch on the shared objectives and recognize the importance of flood protection and infrastructure protection at the same time. And so as we look back to this slide from the first webinar, we're asking you to think about what your idea requires. And mostly we're looking at gray, green, blue today, but we're queuing up for hopefully an expansive conversation that can inform dreamy ideas people have to improve permitting processes. The other important and interesting opportunity that is on the radar now is if you are a Washington resident and person whose work intersects in the state of Washington, in addition to the NFIP comment period that Brandon Parsons is going to share more about, the governor's salmon strategy explicitly calls out permitting and addressing federal and state roadblocks, that they don't quite use that word, so don't quote me on that, but to streamlining in particular habitat restoration projects. And I'll put a link to that in the chat. Really sincere welcome to you all. Encourage you to chat in questions, encourage folks to answer them as their expertise allows. We are working on a write-up that will be hopefully available in January. And if you are into this, please join us. And oops, not that one. We need your help. We're going to be scheduling a final third webinar that will address bigger thinking and ideas, and ping my colleague Hannah if you're interested in getting involved. Without further ado, I'm already off our agenda, taking too long. I want to turn the mic over to Dave Radabaugh, who is our partner in the Department of Ecology. He is going to speak to shared objectives, what brings us all here today together, and how, knowing those shared objectives, we can hopefully advance the change that we need in our systems. Dave, take it away.
Thank you. And for those of you who saw the first webinar, this is a very similar short presentation. Looking at, well, first of all, a few years ago, I was at a conference where I heard a presentation, we heard a presentation from a person some of you probably know, Al Wald, who said, a river does three things. It conveys water, it conveys sediment, and it conveys wood. And so FEMA is very concerned about the conveyance of water. And so the floodway rule, one of the things it was very much intended to do was to maintain that conveyance ability for water. So that is something that is very important. So that is one of the things we still want rivers to do. With that, though, we have treaty obligations, treaty rights and treaty obligations that have been with us for a number of years and have been have received a lot of attention, and for good reason. And so we need to be able to move forward on implementing those treaty rights. So that is something that is very important. That's one of the things that the state needs to do. Related to that is restoration of habitat for anadromous species, particularly species that have been listed as endangered or threatened. So, and there's a lot of similarity here. A lot of the species which are of importance, Chinook salmon in particular, are important, and treaty rights are also in the Puget Sound region listed as threatened. So restoration of habitat for these species is something that we must do, something that we need to be able to move forward on. And finally, in floodplains, we have a lot of development already in a lot of places. So as we move forward with needed restoration projects, as we come forward with approaches to implement treaty rights and obligations, we do need to be able to recognize there is existing development in floodplains and how to not put that development at risk, or in some cases accommodate that development if there are buyouts in some cases, but not put existing buildings at risk. So those are some of the core goals, core objectives that we have moving forward. And in a sense, these webinars are an effort to have a discussion about how to bring these goals and objectives in alignment with each other and move forward simultaneously with them.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. That was great and extremely helpful. We are delighted to have with us, today, Sarah McCarthy with King County. And Sarah has been gracious enough to be willing to provide kind of a timeline / milestone mapping of permitting and restoration projects. Sarah, I've got your slides up. It's an honor to have you here today. Thank you so much for taking time to share some of your insights and wisdom with us. And please take it away.
Thank you. You said you have my slides up. I think I'm sharing my screen, right?
Yes. Can you see
Okay.
them? Can folks see my slides?
I'm seeing the shared objectives,
Oh, wrong one. Sorry.
but I'm happy to share from my.
Okay.
if that works.
I can bring it up. Apologies. There's.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. Okay, so thank you, Kas. My name is Sarah McCarthy. I'm a supervising ecologist and project manager for King County's Water and Land Resources Division. And my work is mostly as a project proponent and primarily in salmon habitat restoration projects. Next slide, please. And so like Kas said, I'm going to talk about kind of conceptual project timelines and permitting considerations. As any project practitioner here knows, our projects can really vary in terms of project complexity, from a small scale project where we're working primarily outside the channel. Maybe it's in a smaller stream, maybe we don't have a federal nexus, to larger scale river projects where we're really trying to make big changes and really reconnect that floodplain where we might have more impacts, federal nexus, et cetera. And, but no matter the scale or the complexity of the project, early assessment of our impacts are essential to effectively scheduling and budgeting our projects. And that means both on the resource side. So will there be fill in waters of the US? What are the impacts to salmon, et cetera? That will really drive what the permit, that permit list with the permit requirements for the project looks like. But then on the hydraulic side, once we have a preliminary project design, what are the hydraulic impacts? Are there changes in the floodway that lead to rise? And what does that mean for the project and its permitting timeline? And potentially, is there a design loop there? Are there impacts that are identified that the project team can possibly change by making small changes to the design? And so with this, with that early assessment of impacts comes a need for really early coordination with the permit agencies. Again, both on the resource side, but then including the local floodplain administrator to understand what the requirements will be. Again, just, you know, that careful scheduling, understanding what kind of a timeline will be associated with those permits and with any hydraulic modeling needs, design loops, because all of that has cost and funding implication for our projects that are working with limited funding and a, you know, what is a critical timeline for salmon recovery. Next slide, please. So this is a very conceptual, small scale restoration project timeline. Maybe the project takes a couple of years to design. Maybe there is not a federal nexus. So this project is looking at streamlined permitting at the federal and state level. To our folks outside of Washington, apologies that this fish habitat enhancement project is referring to a Washington state streamlined permitting option. And, you know, maybe the project includes a contracting timeline, maybe not. But the bottom line really is that the project is striving to hit that in-water work window. And these are set by the services and by the state to minimize impacts to fish during construction. And that really is a non-movable target. So anything that comes before that, the scheduling is, like I said, very critical to making sure that you can hit that in-water work window typically during the summer for our projects. And one other note here is that on the streamlined permitting in Washington state, One thing we that received clarification this year through the legislative session was that even for projects that qualify as a fish habitat enhancement project, the project applicant must still document consistency with local, state, and federal flood risk reduction requirements. So again, going back to that early coordination with the local floodplain administrator to understand what that means for your project so that you're not running into surprises late in the design and permitting timeline. Next slide, please. And so this is a conceptual timeline for a larger scale project. Again, these are largely made up, but in part based on experiences. So maybe this project takes a little longer to design, say 3 years. There's more analyses, more modeling required for the project, and say there's a federal nexus. So federal permits are required for the project. Again, you're still striving for that in-water work window. You have a schedule that you know of, and you've made commitments to funding agencies. So again here, and this is where I think a lot of our worries and angst are coming from through this, this year, through these processes, is what should we be planning for? What does our timeline mean? And for projects that are already underway, what are the impacts going to be to our schedules? So say with this project, it's going through the federal permitting process and modeling during that time, and determines that a CLOMR is going to be required. That because that, as far as our understanding, is that starts once Endangered Species Act consultation is completed. If that extends the permitting timeframe, again, you're looking at risk to not hitting the in-water work window. So next slide, please. So even a small change in the project timeline can cause a project proponent to miss that in-water work window. Next slide, please. And so, like I said, even small delays there can lead to bigger delays in construction timing. That has implications for grant funding for our projects. It has implications for cost associated with additional permit requirements that the project proponent maybe wasn't anticipating early on. And so the bottom line here, excuse me. And so what we're trying to avoid is really putting our critical funding at risk, delaying the benefit for salmon that are depending on us to restore the habitat as quickly as possible. And so I'm very excited to be part of this process, to look at opportunities to increase efficiencies, looking for flexibility where they might exist. And, for my advice to project proponents is really to, plan ahead, ask questions, work with the permit agencies, including the local floodplain administrator, as partners to find the most expedient path forward. And thank you, Kas, for convening these webinars.
No, thank you, Sarah. That was awesome. And folks are expressing in the chat some of their experiences, and that's certainly true. Again, really invite Fema, Ecology, and any other local folks to kind of answer or even weigh in on some of these items. And thank you for translation of acronyms as well. Keep that going. We are now going to turn it over to Dale Meck with Fema. And Dale, while I pull up your slides, would you introduce yourself? And again, thanks so much for joining us. We're really honored and delighted to have you here and look forward to hearing your talk.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, and I'm hoping that you can hear me and that we can get slides set up. I'm going to try and cheat and have my version of my slides on my side so that I can see my notes.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can make that happen. Okay, I think we got it there. So Kas, you're showing the full version, so you're going to give away my poll question.
No, I'll put it on present mode so
Perfect.
that people can't
Perfect.
see
Yeah, go ahead and do that. I don't want people to get the there we go. Yeah, all right. All right, thanks, folks. Yeah, my name is Dale. I joined FEMA Region 10 in July as a civil engineer. I previously worked for a local community for the flood control zone district. Prior to that, I was a consulting engineer specializing in flood risk reduction and floodplain restoration projects. Just as a kind of a bit of a caveat here, I'm the new kid on the block at FEMA. I've noticed already that Briar is a ninja in the chat answering questions, and I'm really glad to have a couple other FEMA folks here so that when we get into discussion, we can talk on some of the pieces that I'm less familiar with. I'm not going to talk about the rescindment at all. What I want to talk about today is the 2D no-rise. So next slide, please. All right, so just a quick recap of kind of where that no-rise concept comes from, right? This is the regulation 44 CFR 60.3D3 for communities that have a regulatory floodway. They have this basic provision baked into their ordinance, right? And I've highlighted the key part there in the middle that I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail. So next slide, please. Okay, so that regulation was written back in the day, the NFIP was getting started. And at that time, standard engineering practice was really limited, right, to one-dimensional modeling. We didn't have many of the tools that we have today. And as a result, the regulations essentially have the simplifying hydraulic assumptions of 1D baked into them. And I won't get into the weeds here on modeling, but essentially for a 1D model, one-dimensional, you have to assume that you know which way the water is going to go across the floodplain. And you have to kind of assume which areas on the floodplain aren't effective. They don't move flow. They're just kind of ponded areas, right? So that all happens, from somebody looking at a map and kind of figuring it out. But you do have to make that assumption outside of the model. And the model, a 1D model isn't aware of lateral variability in the floodplain. It's very straight line, one-dimensional, right? And those assumptions, those hydraulic assumptions, are somewhat baked into the way that the regulations work. And until recently, that was kind of baked into FEMA's implementation of those regulations, right? The guidance and the standards that we put out. And so today, what I want to talk about is some updates to those guidance and standards as it pertains to the use of 2D models and specifically on the no-rise. And the hope is that for some ecological restoration projects, this might be helpful for getting things done more efficiently. We'll talk a bit more about that, but first I want to launch a poll question. So you could go to the next slide. There you go, or launch it. Perfect. Okay. And I'm not going to give you very long. I want like 20 seconds here. I'm just going to keep talking. You're going to keep putting in your answers. Who formally and officially approves the no-rise analysis? You only get one choice. Even I get to participate. So I'm going to put in my answer. All right, next slide, Kaz, and whenever those results are available, it'd be great to pop those up. And I don't know whether I get to see those or not, but okay. Oh, good job, people. Okay, if you can see the results, 66% of you got it right. I managed to fool about 25% of you, though. Okay, so that next slide, we'll answer it.
Sorry.
It's all right. And one more. Perfect. There you go. So who officially and formally approves the no-rise analysis? The correct answer there, yes, is the local community, right? The local community, they have an ordinance, right, that was they passed that's compliant with the NFIP minimum standards, but it may go beyond the minimum standards, right? Many local communities have decided they want a higher standard, more restrictive, and so it's the community's duty, if you will, to implement their own ordinance. And so when a project moves forward in the floodway and they get that development permit, then the community has to say, oh, hey, this project's in the floodway. In accordance with our ordinance, this is what you need to do. And so compliance for any particular project is going to need to go through the local community. And so as a kind of a caveat, if that community wants a one-dimensional analysis, that may be your best option. In a lot of situations, they've got new modeling, and a 1D model is going to get it done quick and without a lot of additional coordination needs. You know, my objective here is really just to get the word out that there are other tools available that are acceptable to FEMA, and that in many situations can actually provide a much more comprehensive understanding of flood risk. You know, as the water moves across the floodplain and how it might change for a specific proposal. So, okay, so if the local community approves this, right, why is FEMA involved? Next slide. We're going to go back to the CFR. This time I've highlighted in yellow the standard engineering practice part there. You know, as we said earlier, you know, that regulation comes from the late 60s, and it recognized explicitly that engineering methods are going to change, right? You know, the computational tools that we have available to us have grown dramatically. And so the regulations kind of saw that coming and said, look, technical improvements in the way we do flood hazard modeling are going to get better. You need to keep up. So how does FEMA do that? Next slide. Go back one. There we go. Oh, should have some green. It should say guidance at the top of it. Keep going up. There you go. So FEMA maintains guidance and standards documents to support the way that the program is implemented, right? This is essentially FEMA's interpretation and implementation of the National Flood Insurance Program and all the related CFRs. So these policy documents are updated annually to kind of reflect the way that we have new tools that are changing and new methods, right? So they've gone through a lot of changes. GIS was a big one, you know, the ability to do digital products was another one. 2D modeling is another one. The 2021 updates just came out actually. And I put the link there at the bottom, and I'll drop it into the chat a little later when I have a chance. And so, you know, this is essentially the way that FEMA administers the National Flood Insurance Program, and it includes all sorts of rules on how to do stuff, right? How to change the maps, you know, what the maps need to have on them, how they need to be produced. But it also has guidance on the no-rise. I'll note before we go on that this guidance and standards library, if you will, there's over 3,000 pages of document in that collectively, right? There's a lot of material. It's a complex program. One of the things, they're all sorted into different categories. One of the things that I'm hoping to do at the regional level is work to make certain parts of that more accessible, more available, in kind of bite-sized pieces, and we'll touch on that a little bit more. Next slide. So around 2019, FEMA had a white paper come out that basically, acknowledged that people are using 2D models more and more for a number of reasons, especially for design purposes. You get a lot more information about a project and about flood risk in a lot of situations with a 2D model. And so FEMA put together this, they call it an IPT, integrated project team, to basically say, okay, we got these models out there. People are having to do a lot of funny business to get things done. We need to update our guidance and standards. Let's go through everything and figure out where within the CFR we've got room to update guidance and standards to allow for 2D tools to be used. So we're adding a tool to the toolbox, right? The 1D is still available, it's still an option, and still may be the best option for a lot of situations. If you can't meet a no-rise, for instance, and you need to go through the Calibration process and you have an effective map that was based off of a 1D model, you're going to need to tie into that and go through the full Calibration process. And so that's probably going to be a lot easier and more straightforward if you use the 1D model that the map was based off of. Let's see. Next slide. So actually, sorry, go back one more just real quick. So that's the screenshot guidance for flood risk analysis and mapping. That's guidance document 79. That is the one that has information on floodway analysis. I think I've got the right picture there. I might have the wrong picture, but it's guidance document 79. And what I want to do today real quick is just summarize some of the key points from it, recognizing that a couple of the other talks today are going to hit on some kind of field case studies that used a method along this line. So there's a lot of text. Next slide. Essentially, in chapter 11, guidance document 79, we lay out, hey, here's how you can do the no-rise, right? Here, these are the no-rise. This is the no-rise guidance. This is very similar to what you see in the regional document, the 2013 version, but it also has some information on, hey, here's what to do for 2D. And essentially the way it works is it says, okay, well, let's let the model decide where the cross sections should be. Let's let the model, we're going to dump the water into the model. We're going to let it flow. And then instead of using an arbitrarily drawn cross section, we're gonna basically use what's called an evaluation line. You could think of it as a hydraulic cross section, and we're gonna use that to evaluate projects and whether they raise or not the base flood elevation, right? But the way a 1D model does it, it kind of averages, if you will, all the way across the cross section. It's giving you one value for water surface elevation for the whole cross section. Whereas the 2D model is giving you a water surface elevation at every cell across that evaluation line. And so in order to do the same level of analysis as a 1D model does, and as the CFR was built on, the guidance in the document 79 says, okay, well, you can do that same level of analysis using a 2D model if you average the base flood elevation changes across that cross section. In this case, we're calling it a hydraulic cross section, an evaluation line, using a suitable discharge or a suitable weighting method. In this case, we generally recommend a discharge weighting it. And that's a technical term, but essentially, let's hold 2D models to the same standard as the 1D model, because that's what the CFR is built on. Then at the bottom of the slide, though, you'll see there's one additional thing here. It says, oh, and by the way, you should also compare cell by cell, right? You should compare your pre-project and your post-project models at every single point to see where the rises are and make sure there aren't any on existing insurable structures. This is a higher standard than the 1D no-rise. And the reason that it might be more beneficial is that it actually gives you more information for your design, but you can also, with a little bit more comfort, say, yeah, this doesn't affect anybody and we meet the no-rise. So if I was a floodplain administrator, there are times when I would be like, look, I'd really like to see how your project affects lateral flow, not just the 1D approach. If you can't meet that, next slide, if you can't meet that no-rise requirement, again, you still have to follow the CFR, you still have to follow the local ordinance. The Clomer may be your best route. In a lot of situations, we tell people, look, just plan for it. And then if you can meet the no-rise, great, you save budget and time. And if not, you're ready to go. We are working to update our regional no-rise guidance document to kind of boil down the chapter 11 of guidance document 79 to make it more accessible, both for project proponents, and we really want to stand by our local floodplain administrators and make sure that they know, okay, here's what we should expect to see with the submittal. Does this meet the things? Can we approve this or not? Let's see. I think that's it. And what I want to do, I'll be around afterwards. I'd love to talk more about this, but I want to kind of respect the time here. So thank you.
Thank you, Dale. And just to reground folks, just in case anyone's here who wasn't at the first webinar or didn't have a chance to catch up on it by video, as we move into this second webinar dealing with kind of what folks can do within the bounds of current systems, we really leaned into explaining systems today and hearing from folks the complexity, variability, and different interpretations. And so without further ado, I'm going to invite Casey to the screen. Casey Kramer with Natural Systems Design is going to dig a little deeper into 2D. Casey, I'm going to bring up your slides, and Casey's going to be sharing an example from previous work. So welcome, Casey, and thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Kaz, and yeah, thanks everyone for putting on this great webinar. It's great just to get all this input in here and continually try to improve the state of practice for this. So yeah, like Kaz mentioned, this presentation is going to provide an overview of a case study that utilizes some methods that were proposed to FEMA for evaluating floodplains and floodways with 2D models a few years ago, actually. And also, this project was actually used to satisfy a no-rise for a project located in Yakima County. Again, like Dale was saying, at the time this specific case study was developed, that 2020 FEMA document 79 that Dale mentioned was not available yet for public review. And at that time, there really was no guidance for 2D modeling. So with that said, you know, in the last 2 years, there has been some advances, but there definitely is a need to continue on advancing that. With that said, let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. So yeah, this case study, again, it focuses on a bridge retrofit and a bridge replacement project on State Route 241. It crosses the Yakima River just north of the city of Mapton in Washington. In this photo, the flow is going from the left to the right. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So there was two bridges. One was 241.5, which was over the main channel of the Yakima River. This one was actually only being retrofitted, so there was no in-water work. But the photo there on the bottom, bridge 241.2, this was located in the Yakima River floodplain. And this is the one that was actually going to be replaced, and an opportunity to provide more floodplain connectivity in the overall floodplain of the Yakima River. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So one key distinguishing criteria, as with any project like folks have been mentioning, is, you know, really to go in and determine where does your project reside within a special flood hazard area. So this project site specifically was located in a FEMA regulated floodway. This graphic here, for folks that haven't used it, it utilizes the FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer View website, which, if it's available and updated in your project, can be a really nice handy tool for getting special flood hazard area information for your project. For those that haven't looked at these kinds of things before, the two distinguishing characteristics in this floodplain are the effective floodway, which is shown with those red hash diagonal marks, more in the main core of the flow, and then also that blue shaded area, which is the 1% annual recurrence, or the 100-year flow inundation limits. So let's go to the next slide. So that red box in that previous slide, this slide is basically a zoomed in version of that previous slide. This is depicting the FEMA base flood elevations, or BFEs, which are depicted in this graphic here as the little wiggly lines with an elevation associated with them. Also shown here is FEMA cross sections. Those are depicted by the black lines with those letters next to them, and also State Route 241, which is shown here with the red line. Again, flow going from the left to the right. And as we'll talk about further on how a no-rise was complete for this, the base flood elevation on the furthest downstream extent, so the far right squiggly line, was utilized as the boundary condition for this no-rise assessment. Let's go to the next slide. So for those that joined us for the first webinar, Ted went over a general no-rise process that would be utilized. But for folks that weren't able to attend, or folks that are new to a no-rise, this just kind of lays it out in the general process that a licensed engineer would have to go through in completing a no-rise process. So that first step that we'll be walking through these steps as we go through the presentation, but that first step is obtaining a copy of the effective model to develop that effective flood insurance study. from FEMA, and these can be made available from FEMA, and sometimes the local jurisdictions will also have copies. In this specific case, no model was available, and we'll talk about that as we go through here. That next step is you would duplicate the results of the effective model, again, if it's available, and to create what they term as a duplicate effective model. After that, you would make any corrections to that effective model to create a corrected effective model. Corrections may include improvements such as technical errors in the effective modeling or the inclusion of any floodplain changes that occurred prior to the date of the effective model. Next would be to develop a model for existing conditions, and that is to reflect any modifications that have occurred within the floodplain since the date the effective model, but prior to the proposed development, so prior to your project. And this would then create the existing conditions model. Again, in this case, specifically, no effective model was available. So if that was the case for your project too, in this case, the corrected effective model is more or less the same thing as the existing conditions model. So as you then would transition, you have your existing model, existing conditions model developed, you would then go in and put in your proposed development, retaining the currently adopted floodway widths, and then this would then become your proposed conditions model. So once you have the proposed conditions model and the existing conditions model, you would do a difference of those two. And in the case that you're able to demonstrate that you have no rise in water surface elevations, that's when you would go through and submit a no rise certification. And like I think roughly 65% of you got right. And as Dale mentioned, that no rise certification is approved by the local floodplain administrator, not FEMA. So that's just an important distinction. So early and often communication with your local floodplain administrator is a very good idea, as it is for any type of analysis with your project. Next slide, please. So what this is depicting is the domain of the model that was utilized for this analysis. This actually consisted of a 4-mile reach with a floodplain that greatly varied. It was about 1,000 feet in width downstream, where the river definitely gets confined within a canyon, and that varied upstream to over 10,000 feet, so over a 2-mile wide floodplain on the upstream end. As is important with any kind of modeling, the domain was selected such that the boundary conditions didn't affect the model results at the project site, which this was verified through a sensitivity analysis that we performed. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So what this is depicting is a lot of things, but it's existing bridge and the proposed bridge and the corresponded what they term meshes in the 2D hydraulic model. In this case, this is showing software SMS and SRH2D that's promoted by the Federal Highway Administration. And that's the software that's utilized for conducting the 2D analysis. The graphic there on the left, that's the existing bridge versus the graphic on the right is the proposed bridge. And what you can probably see in this is that the proposed bridge provides more hydraulic conveyance, which also then encourages more floodplain connectivity in this relief bridge on the Yakima River. It also provides more free transport of any kind of woody material that would be transported that may have gotten hung up on the previous bridge. One other thing that Dale mentioned that's really important here is a key distinction between a 1D and a 2D model. So if you look really closely in these graphics, you can kind of see all these little cells or elements. Some of them are triangular shaped, some of them are square shaped. What's important about that is that for every single one of those elements, you actually are getting a water surface elevation and a velocity and other hydraulic characteristics. Whereas in a one-dimensional model, if you had one cross section drawn across this, you would only have one water surface elevation and one velocity. And in this model, along that same cross section that you would see in a 1D model where you'd only have one result, in this case, you'd be getting several hundred results. So the takeaway there is that two-dimensional models can provide a much better understanding of hydraulics and flood risk. Go ahead and next slide, Kas. So this graphic here is a depiction of the corrected effective model, again, which in this case is the same as the existing conditions model. As previously noted, the FEMA flood insurance study flow and the base flood elevation were used for the upstream and downstream boundary conditions respectively. So when we went back in, and this is coming up in another slide, but the 661-foot contour on the right, that aligned with the FEMA BFE from the effective study. So that was the downstream model boundary condition. And then the FEMA flow was utilized for that upstream boundary condition. The color contours here, that's the variations in water surface elevation that you're actually able to grab out or actually get out of the two-dimensional model. And then also shown here is those red lines, and what those red lines are depicting are 1 foot whole 1 foot water surface elevation contours across the channel. Go ahead, Kas. So this graphic here, it was shown on a previous slide. So this is where the red hatched area is that FEMA floodway, and the blue is that 1% annual recurrence, or that 100-year flow inundation limit. The base flood elevations are also depicted again by those wiggly lines, and the FEMA cross sections are also shown with those solid black lines. And then go ahead and click, and hopefully it'll kind of fade in. Okay, so as that faded, what you might notice is that there is a very good relationship between the FEMA inundation limits and the 2D model inundation limits. And so what we're looking at here are the water surface elevations and the extents from the 2D model. One thing though to note is these blue lines. So these blue lines, again, these are representing those effective base flood elevations, where the red lines are those whole 1 foot contours determined by the 2D model. One big takeaway from this is that 1D, like Dale mentioned, 1D models, the orientation of the base flood elevations and a lot of other important hydraulic characteristics is that they are very highly dependent on how the modeler lays out their cross sections. So in straight narrow reaches, like the one downstream, where you may have a project that is in a very confined canyon, that's a location where you may see pretty good agreement between a 2D model and a 1D model. And that's just one of the assumptions that goes into, and you should be asking yourselves if you're doing a 1D model. Whereas if you go upstream and you look at the differences, the blue lines are more or less straight across, where those red lines are the same water surface elevation contour, but determined by the 2D model. And so that 664 contour you can see is more or less a straight line across the entire floodplain width, where the red contour, it is highly variable and much different than the 1D assumption.
Mm-hmm.
This graphic also kind of shows there isn't a requirement that folks are probably aware of, that when you are developing your corrected effective model, you do need your upstream transition to be within a half a foot of the effective base flood elevation. And so that's what this also shows, that this two-dimensional model did a good job replicating the effective base flood elevations. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So once that corrected effective existing conditions model was completed, contours at a specified interval, in this case, I just used 1 foot as an easy example, were used to what Dale suggested and stated to create these evaluation lines. So these evaluation lines are really important because they basically are the location at which you're going to compare your water surface elevations to demonstrate your no rise. These are also what Dale mentioned are the locations at which that discharge weighted water surface elevation is computed. And this is just a very important thing, because if in the case of the 1D model, the locations of where evaluation is taking place, it's really dependent. It's very subjective to the modeler. Whereas in these two-dimensional model, And this procedure that we're outlining here, it is not subjected. It's actually based on the hydraulic model results. Next slide, please. So using that corrected effective existing conditions model as a baseline, the proposed, in this case, oh, go back up, sorry. No, you're good. The proposed bridge was added. And so those same evaluation lines from that existing conditions model were utilized to assess discharge weighted water surface elevations for those proposed conditions. And like Dale mentioned, one of the criteria that is a little bit more stringent, but it's just great for evaluating flood risk, is that there was also a difference plot of the 2D model results to look at local rises. It was important to note here too, that early on we did make sure that there was no insurable structures that were located within this, this case study. So go ahead to the next slide. So once you have the existing conditions evaluation lines, those contours here, as you can see, are going to be those even 1 foot hole contours, but those could be specified to any kind of a contour interval that the modeler would like. There is some guidelines in document 79 that allude to the spacing and frequency of those lines. And then the proposed conditions in this case is utilizing those same evaluation lines and then obtaining the discharge weighted water surface elevation. And then it's a simple subtraction of the proposed minus the existing. And if your difference is less than 0.005, then you would be deemed to meet a no rise. And that's what then would be submitted to the local community. One more slide.
Casey, there's a question from Leif about calibration requirements.
Yeah.
Could you speak to that briefly?
So yeah, and calibration probably shouldn't, you know, that's one thing that really needs to be accounted for, because it's not uncommon for the FEMA mapping to not be based on true flood risk in some cases. So I definitely would say don't blindly calibrate to an effective model. You know, go through, do your best at, you know, developing your model based on conditions. And in this case, because of the geometry and the hydraulics through the project site, we were able to meet the criterion where if you're within a ½ foot of the water surface elevation at, in this case, the upstream transition, then that was the requirement. So sorry, so in summary, ½ foot of that discharge weighted water surface elevation to be within the water surface elevation reported at the FEMA cross section.
There are a lot of like focused questions that feel really important. We're also a little limited on time. I do want to call out this one from Sean Welch, asking, what about 2D encroachments to determine the floodway? How did mapping change?
Yeah.
And then if you have a couple polls or whatever, you would priority to wrap up. But thank you, Casey. This is great.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to cram in here. These are good questions. I actually had to take a lot of information out. So the floodway, we did a floodway encroachment analysis on this as well, but I had to remove that just to the time. So maybe if this is sparking some additional thoughts, maybe we could have a follow-up afterwards, or maybe it's another webinar topic at another time. Yeah, so just to close out here, so just similar to the as discussed previously, in addition to the discharge weighted average water surface elevation lines, this right here is showing a subtraction of the proposed conditions from the existing conditions on all of the 2D elements. So what you're looking at here, again, flow left to right, the blue is signifying a reduction in water surface elevation, and the yellow is indicating a rise. So what this tells you is that there's a lot of things that you can get out of this. One of which is the new bridge is promoting more floodplain content activity in the southern relief bridge. And so what you are seeing because of that, and it's not uncommon for this or for other restoration projects with that goal of reconnecting floodplains, is that you can get a better distribution of flow. And in this case, you get a rise. What's interesting though, is that because of the two-dimensional model being used in this case, we're actually able to still demonstrate a no rise here from an average perspective, because although you do get this local rise, it's actually counterbalanced by a reduction in the main stem. It's not going to be the case for all projects, but in this case, that was the outcome of the project. The next slide is just kind of going through the conclusions. So a key takeaway, or some key takeaways. In this case, one 2D hydraulic model was utilized to perform all hydraulic assessments required for project delivery. This included the bridge replacement project. For the bridge replacement project, this included bridge hydraulic modeling, a floodplain and floodway assessment, a scour assessment, scour countermeasure design, temporary work platform assessment, and then we also did some fish passage assessment for part of the federal permitting process. A no-rise was successfully completed with a similar protocol to the FEMA new standards and guidelines for assessing floodplains and floodways. Again, just note that this was done prior to document 79, but it's very, very similar. Part of the reason for this webinar, additional communication and clarification is definitely needed to more consistently implement FEMA standards. Having a clear direction at the scoping level of the project and being able to utilize one hydraulic model rather than a whole slew of them can definitely save everyone a lot of time and money. One note on that last slide too, so other challenges such as that flow redistribution that you would get by reconnecting floodplains and changes to bridge replacements or restoration projects definitely needs further discussion, which was why we're all here. And again, like to the other point was that, yeah, there's just not enough to cover all of this today, but hopefully what this presentation did is it kind of sparked some additional questions and then ultimately hopefully leads to some additional conversations to just really improve the state of practice over time. So with that, that's all I got.
Thank you, Casey. The questions keep filtering in, and I just wanted to flag a couple things as we transition over to Leif's presentation. We've got the slide deck for you to offer comments, reflections, ideas. Hannah, would you put the link in the chat one more time? And among the things we're interested in hearing from you all are specific ideas for how state or federal processes might be improved. So if there's an exemption that prevents your projects from being streamlined, if there is a lack of clarity around requirements, we're hearing some folks over model and map, others under model and map. That's said crudely, but whatever specifics you might be able to share where you could see an opportunity for state or federal improvements, we have a unique opportunity in time and really encourage you to add those to the chat. Leif, welcome. Casey, I might have affiliated you accidentally with Natural Systems Design, your Natural Waters. Leif is with Natural Systems Design, was a wonderful speaker at the first webinar, and we are very lucky to have him back. Leif, are you able to share your screen? And if not, you can introduce and we can make sure you can.
Yeah, I think so. Just give me a second. Is that working?
Perfect.
All right. Well, awesome, everybody. I'll try to move through my case study here fairly quickly. It's pretty similar to Casey's. The difference being this is a case study in an approximate zone A floodplain. And honestly, a lot of the steps that Casey just described are very similar in a zone A floodplain. There's really just more tolerance in terms of calibrating to that effective model, and then the amount of rise required in the zone A floodplain. But really the steps in kind of working through what are the impacts are very similar. So quick context on location. This is on the Middle Fork Nooksack River. That kind of expands on a lot of the discussion or some of the discussion in our first webinar of a lot of our river systems are really dynamic. So you can see, you know, a channel location in 2006 and then a channel location in 2020 here. The river's moved around a lot in this reach. And the goal of this project was to help reduce channel migration rates through implementation of engineered log jams that would also improve habitat for ESA listed spring Chinook in the project area. So let me move through here. there's just a quick overview of like the engineered logjam layout and kind of both reaches. This is a big project. It's actually still ongoing with the lamination that involves up to 4 phases of engineered logjam construction. I'm showing you here the analysis for phases 1 and 4 to work through that permitting process. And here's the FEMA effective map for that area. So in an approximate zone A floodplain, essentially no detailed study has been done in that area. And there's a wide variety of methods that were used to delineate zone A floodplains, but essentially a modeling effort similar to a floodway or a zone AE floodplain did not occur. And so the methods used are variable through that process. I thought I'd maybe start with also some like best practices that I've learned over the years and just doing floodplain analyses and no rises and Calmer loamers. One, like you heard Dale mention, whenever you get started with a project, check your local community code. Every community has their code in different locations. Some communities, like in a county, it might be your county code, it might be in shorelines. It's going to vary depending on each community where that code is, but every community is going to have their own code. Communities have to adhere to the minimum NFIP requirements, but they can also have more restrictive requirements. So some common examples of that in Washington State are King County and Pierce County have much more restrictive floodplain regulations than the minimum NFIP requirements and whatnot. So you want to understand what community you're working with. When it comes to the minimum requirements in the zone A floodplain, you're allowed to cause up to a 1 foot rise in the existing condition or an existing condition flood elevation in those cases. So you don't technically have to meet a no rise. What I like to call this is really more of a floodplain impacts analysis to understand what are the impacts of your project and are they below that 1 foot threshold. Another really helpful tip, I like to start all my efforts with really like a pre-application meeting with your local floodplain administrator. That's pretty common in the permitting world for ESA listed or ESA permits and other areas. The same really goes for floodplain permits and regulations here. There's a lot of nuance and technical things that you want to work through. In that pre-application meeting, I call it, I really walk through the technical approach that's going to be used for that project. What's the available information? Have you done a FEMA data archive request? Does the county have information, or have other studies been done in that area that you can make use of? Are there any structures in the floodplain? What topographic data are you going to use? What's your hydrologic analysis that you're going to use for the project? Your hydraulic modeling, and walk through all the steps of that technical analysis. And the calls for this are really with your local floodplain administrator. They're not with FEMA. Oftentimes FEMA gets called into these discussions, but these are approaches that your technical professionals helping you advance your project should provide some insight on and recommendations back to your local floodplain administrator. And you want to work out really before you get the process underway so you don't go down a pathway that doesn't get you your permit at the end. Quick note here on phasing. So like I mentioned here at the start, this project had, I guess this project or the analysis I'm presenting here was for 2 phases of this project, which will probably encompass probably 4 or 5 total phases. The project, as every phase was permitted, the project was required to look at the cumulative impact of each of the phases. Since it really was one project that was just being built over multiple years, the local floodplain administrator here in this case, and I think it's even FEMA policy that you need to look at the cumulative guidance for all the phases, not an individual phase. Just a quick snapshot here of an engineered logjam that many of us have seen out here in the Northwest. And then go into a similar map that Casey was just showing here. So starting on the left, we have our existing condition, 100-year water surface. In the middle is our proposed condition, 100-year water surface. And then on the right is our difference mapping, showing the difference between those two. Colors in the brown are areas of larger rise. Colors in the purple are areas of actually water surface decrease. You can see here, we were putting log jams right in the low flow channel, so we were causing a fair amount of rise in that water surface elevation. Now, when we took that rise and used a similar approach that Casey was describing in terms of a cross-sectional analysis, the results showed that we did not exceed that 1 foot threshold for allowable rises in the Zone A floodplain. This work was done in 2015 or 2016, so we used more of a cross-section analysis, not exactly what Casey and Dale talked about in terms of a contour analysis across the cross-section, but a very similar process of creating an average water surface elevation using the 2D model mesh to determine kind of what was our average rise or impact across that cross-section. From there, you can see kind of the table. So this project kind of pushed the boundaries of what's allowable in the Zone A floodplain because in a couple areas up to 1 foot of rise. And then through the floodplain development permit process in Whatcom County, we submitted a technical report that detailed kind of the analysis and approach used and included an engineering impacts certification that said, I certify that this doesn't cause more than 1 foot of rise in this area. And we submitted it to the county for their review and approval. I thought I'd maybe end with just some common questions that I've encountered during this process as a practitioner. And, you know, I don't have, my intent here is not to maybe go through the answers here, but just kind of prompt people to think around how do we want to think about, or how do we want to represent restoration projects in hydraulic models, as there's a lot of variability of how we represent restoration projects in hydraulic models. And a lot of that comes down to professional judgment. But a common question that comes up in projects I'm involved with is how to handle porosity in different log jams. Some log jams are more of like blocked obstructions that really do not have any inner flow through them, but other log jams have a lot of inner flow through them, and they have some amount of conveyance that simply blocking that area in your model doesn't appropriately reflect those. How do we want to handle scour? So we know if a log jam is designed to be stable, it's going to create a scour hole, and that's going to increase capacity. That may or may not be something that's built as part of the project, but might be something to consider in your evaluation. Another big one that comes up is a lot of these projects are built to restart geomorphic processes that are absent in a lot of our river systems and were here historically. So how do we handle the expected geomorphic change from these projects? That's a really big one to kind of think around. Technically, as I understand FEMA regulations and floodplain code, we're really evaluating the as-built condition, and this future geomorphic response is something to think about, but is really not something that's incorporated into the process right now. How do we want to handle future debris racking potential? Like we know log jams and some of our projects are going to rack a lot of naturally accumulating debris moving down the system. That's really great from a habitat perspective, but it is going to cause more of an impact on a water surface elevation perspective through that process. And then the other big one is, I thought I'd just end with is, what if there are structures in the floodplain that are impacted? And this goes back to kind of some of the stuff that Dale mentioned and Casey, even using a 2D model approach, if there is a rise and impacts the structure, that goes into a no-go zone when it comes to your floodplain development permit. So you really need to understand not only are you within the regulation tolerances, but are you having an impact on a structure in the floodplain? And if you are, you need to modify your project such that you're not having an impact. So even if you're within, in this case, of that 1 foot of allowable rise threshold, if our project had an impact, showed a rise on a structure, that would have required us to redesign things. So I think from there, I'll give it back to you, Kas. I know I went through that pretty quick, but I felt like we kind of had other things on the agenda. So if there's any questions people want me to ask or answer, I'm more than willing, but we can also move through the agenda.
Thank you, Leif. That was awesome. I love this final slide of common questions. So incredibly helpful. I find it always challenging to track when many comments are coming in, and there's a lot. If you don't mind, Leif, Tom Hutchinson queued up a good question for you. I'm wondering if you could answer it in chat in the interest of time. And I want to flag for folks, Casey mentioned this possible follow-up on modeling specifically. We might do that. And where your questions are leaning in to aspects of modeling that we might expand upon in an additional webinar, please share that. We did collect ideas from you about what future conversations would you find helpful, in particular questions with Fema, but also stories from the field. And hearing some of these examples are incredibly helpful. Dale, did you want to add anything, or are you just popping in visually?
I'm just popping in visually.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks for the comments in the chat. I've been copying as fast as possible because it's really good input, and I look forward to talking more about those things with people.
Great. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Olsen. Jessica, I can pull up your slides. While I do that, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, but quickly I'll say this is shifting back again to the local regulatory context. And where do local entities serve as partners in finding ways to increase efficiencies, streamlining, et cetera. Jessica is going to describe some of the work underway in the Columbia River Gorge. And so Jessica, please make your introduction and I'll pull up your slides.
Thank you, Kas, and I appreciate that. We are shifting gears a little bit, and I'm just really thankful to be here learning from all of you today. When I talked to Kas about this, I was just so excited because we at the Columbia River Gorge Commission have been talking about these same types of issues. So I'll just kind of share our perspective on permitting, streamlining, or however you want to characterize it.
Sorry, wrong one.
As Kas gets the slides up. So my name is Jessica Olsen. I'm a senior planner with the Columbia River Gorge Commission. And when we get into the slides, I'll kind of share a little bit about how we work and the regulatory framework in the gorge for those who may not be familiar. I do have slides I can.
I've got it finally.
Sure, you got it? Okay. Okay, perfect. I'm just gonna refer to my own notes here. Okay, great. So the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area, for those who don't know, this is a federal designation. So we have a federal act of Congress from the 1980s that guides us. So the regulations there apply to all land ownerships, private, state, federal, commercial, in a roughly 252,000 acre area on both sides of the river, on the Columbia River, portions of 6 different counties in Oregon and Washington, from the Sandy River Delta over to the mouth of the Deschutes River. And so our mission in the scenic area is to protect and provide for the enhancement of a whole slew of resources, scenic, cultural, recreation, and natural resources. And embedded in that is upholding tribal treaty rights and to protect and support the local economies in the gorge. So a very diverse mission, but certainly resource protection and enhancement is a huge part of what we do. The scenic area is jointly managed by the Commission, which is a very small agency, and also the U.S. Forest Service has a National Scenic Area Office, a unit of the National Forest Service. So I do want to acknowledge my colleague Diane Hopster is on the call today. She's a hydrologist for the Forest Service and so far more knowledgeable than I am about the ins and outs of actual floodplain restoration projects. I invite her to chime in at any point. You can go to the next slide, Kas. So this is just kind of a spread of I mentioned that we've been thinking about these same issues of how do we as a regulatory agency try to make it easier, more effective and efficient for partners who want to take voluntary action, or even those who are required through mitigation responsibilities to restore and enhance habitats and all those resources that I mentioned we protect. And so this is coming up for us on several fronts. You've got floodplains there in the middle. Salmon habitat, of course, cold water refuge stream habitat is a high priority for us on multiple fronts, but also forest health projects, proactive fuels reduction work that can be considered forest enhancement projects, and also conservation projects on working lands, on agricultural lands in particular. We hear from all partners working on these types of issues that it really becomes a struggle. And for us, a lot of what we hear is about small grant opportunities with short timelines, and that permitting burden just becomes too much to even get these projects on the ground and eats up all of the grant funding. And so I'm sure you all are familiar with these refrains, but we work at all different scales of project size. So very small private land projects all the way up to very large federal undertakings. Next slide. And this is just, you can kind of cruise through these, Kas, at least do one more. So these are just some examples of the kinds of things, and I can just work through these at any rate. It's a lot of text on the page, but I'll just step through them. So these are just the things that we are thinking about. Again, as we just wrapped up a management plan update. That's the document that guides regulation for the 6 counties in the Gorge. And we're also doing a climate change action plan right now. So of course, a lot of intersections with floodplain restoration, habitat restoration. So in terms of what we might be able to do, these are early concepts. We don't know for sure how well they're going to work, but we're exploring first, just kind of understanding the whole lay of the land, regulatorily speaking, that folks have to go through to see, are there ways that we can piggyback on other planning requirements and types of permits to alleviate some of that burden. Think about exemptions. We do have an expedited review process, and we have uses that are allowed outright. So that could fit for some of the smaller impact projects. Are there BMPs that could sort of substitute for some of the permitting requirements in our plan? The second piece is capacity, and that's huge. And that was one thing that, Kas, when you and I talked about this whole concept, it really excited us. And many of you, I'm sure, can relate to the capacity constraints. You know, ideally, when there are these good projects that we want to see happen, the Forest Service and to the degree that we have the expertise, our agency can step in with technical assistance and move it more quickly and help with the permitting. But of course, capacity is always the limitation there. And we're very interested in thinking about cost sharing, additional positions that could help support the permitting, or spreading funds around to partners in ways that could speed things along. And all of this, of course, when we think about the projects that are implemented in the scenic area, they often have to apply for those county specific permits, and there are varying levels of cost associated with those. So when I mentioned the expedited review, that's a slightly lower cost. So sometimes that's an ideal approach. And then finally, kind of thinking about, are there programmatic models or tiered permitting that we could, you know, is there a checklist that we could use that relates to another permitting process that's already in place? It's really the case that defining consistency with our management plan, and that usually falls to the Forest Service for these enhancement projects, but can also be other regulators like the commission or the counties. That takes a lot of spatially specific information. We really have a hard time making broad sweeping permits because so many things, cultural resources on the ground, lots of different considerations that are so site specific. And so there would often is still supplementary analysis that's needed to get through just what's required of us and the National Scenic Area Act. So just as an example, this week I got a consistency determination from the Forest Service office that was a 50-page document for some forest enhancement work. So the time that it takes them to go through not just consistency with the management plan, but other federal regulations is real and costly. So we're aware of that, and we're just looking for solutions and really excited to leverage the expertise in this room and this whole series of webinars to get at that. That's all I had to share. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Jessica. If any or all of those ideas resonated with you, it's a very opportune time to hear about ideas you could share for funding, whether that's cost sharing positions, investments in monies that might be leveraged towards mapping enhancements. Share that information, please. Put it in the slides, add it to the chat. We'll collect it all. This is a perfect segue to Brandon Parsons, a colleague at American Rivers and who is leading the funding and policy action group work with Floodplains by Design. This is a bit of a great segue between this webinar and the next. Among other things, Brandon is going to speak to work he's been leading along with other, including some folks who are speakers on this call, to draft some comments regarding NFIP open period for the first time in decades, but also just to unleash this big thinking. What do you need to do your jobs better, to advance ecological restoration projects in alignment with flood management and protection of infrastructure? And without further ado, Brandon, welcome, and please take it away.
Thanks, Kas, and thanks everyone for the good discussion today. I just put a couple links in the chat. The first one is to the Federal Register, where FEMA has a request for information out currently to update their floodplain management standards. So Kas, am I able to share my screen?
Yes.
I just put together a couple slides to help me tell this story. So FEMA, for the first time in 45 years, is opening up, is asking for comments on their floodplain management standards. This is a huge opportunity to speak to FEMA National directly to help modernize the program and address some of these challenges that we're all discussing. And so we have put together draft comments based on this request for information from FEMA. They're pretty extensive from my perspective. And I just can't thank some of the folks that have worked on this for all of their comments and input throughout this process. So I had some of those folks here who you've already heard from, Dave Radabaugh, who's our Washington State NFIP coordinator. Sorry for the little typo, but local floodplain managers like Joel Freudenthal and others from different counties in Washington, as well as a land use perspective from Molly Lawrence, our Fish and Wildlife Department, Casey Kramer, who you heard from today, and then input from some of our tribal partners, as well as other floodplain managers and members of the Association of State Floodplain Managers. So really good group, very excited about the detail of these comments and this opportunity. A few of just kind of the big highlights from our comments I wanted to mention was, number one, just asking FEMA to uphold kind of the two primary goals of floodplain management, not only reducing economic losses from flooding, but also preservation and restoration of natural and beneficial functions of floodplains. And I've heard this reiterated in the chat. But that's kind of overarching comment that could be addressed. Additionally, I'm going to pull up my notes too, so I make sure I have this right, all the detail right. Additionally, addressing and developing regulatory structures that accommodate for the dynamic nature of rivers and the beneficial functions of floodplains. One of the big things we've heard from partners locally is that we live in young, impetuous watersheds. Right, our rivers are always moving and changing, and the current regulations and even some of the mapping systems don't necessarily accommodate for that. So to address that, we have some more detailed recommendations. Like a big one would be establishing a state delegated program option, which would, similar to the Clean Water Act, the Coastal Zone Management Act, which would allow Washington State, if we choose, and other states to kind of have more say over how a program could be implemented. We also have recommendations in here to just simply update the definitions to differentiate restoration from true development of structures. And by doing that, you could have different paths based on the actual actions that are taking place in the floodplain. One other one in this category would just be updating the floodway rule, which we've all talked about, part of the reason why we're all here today, to better accommodate threatened and endangered species recovery. This might not include just reinstating the fish enhancement policy wholesale, but it could develop a path similar to that works better with restoration and no rise requirements and the CLOMR process. 3, more adequately assess and address risk based on the-ground conditions. It could be an opportunity to, instead of having just the current zones we do today, differentiating those zones differently based on the conditions on the ground and the true risk to structures. Integrating the Endangered Species Act and biological opinions of the NFIP. I've heard some really good comments about that in the chat, and I think Breyer has done a good job of addressing some of those. We have additional information and recommendations about that nationally. And the last one would just be, protecting critical infrastructure while promoting sustainable development. This could include expanding the NFIP standards to infrastructure and incentivize, equitable and resilient community planning. So there's a lot of information in the comments themselves. I encourage you to take a look for more detail. I did just want to kind of highlight our schedule. We have drafted these comments and are sharing them out. Please give us your feedback if you have it. We crafted these comments so that folks could pull information from them into their own comment letters that they submit to FEMA. But there's also an opportunity to sign on to this letter if you're interested. So this is just kind of a public sourced document that feel free to share and draw from as you see fit. We do ask that all comments are back to us by January 7th, because then we're going to finalize everything before the comment period ends on the 27th. So thank you very much.
Awesome.
And please reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you, Brandon. I have a kind of comment question for you. And as we kind of wind down this formal time, we'll stay on for another 30 minutes, those who are able to continue conversation. But here's my comment question. We know that federal infrastructure funds are coming. We know there's going to be quite a boost for fish-related work, but also transportation infrastructure. Carol McElroy, who is our awesome thought partner leader, was reflecting on the fact that this audience has a lot of ecological restoration voices. How can we build stronger partnerships with flood managers? That's critical as we think of what's this upcoming bazillion-dollar infrastructure boost to infrastructure as well as nature-based solutions. How can we work together to think ahead of that and craft solutions for infrastructure that are also thoughtful with relation to ecosystem needs, processes, and functions? Brandon, I know you've been working a good bit on this. I just wonder if you have any other reflections you'd share. No pressure, but just opening it.
Well, I guess my first reaction there would be there's a lot of information and still a lack of ambiguity, or a bit of ambiguity around what is in the infrastructure bill, what it really means, what the rollout for these funds will be. And so I think in the short term, we will be grappling with that. And our partners with FBD and a lot of the state agencies we work with are currently developing a kind of list of the funding programs that are applicable for their projects and some of their constituents. And they're also kind of going to be receiving more information soon. After the bill is signed, a lot of agencies have 60 to 90 days to determine how they're going to spend the money that they were allocated by Congress. So a lot of these organizations and agencies are in that process now. So we should have more clarity on exactly how these funds will flow around February. So I guess in response, in the short term, we want to make sense of these funding sources. We want to get additional information from agencies, and then we will be putting together some materials that we will share with partners about how these funds could support integrated floodplain management efforts. So y'all might have seen a lot of different lists around about how this could support salmon or how it could support transportation or other things. There can be a lot of overlap between those, especially given the integrated nature of our work. So we're going to do our best to try to distill those out and produce some resources that are most effective for these partners. And we would ask that if y'all have project lists, if there are specific priorities that folks have, please send them our way. We're being asked, at different times to recommend projects or to advocate for funding in different ways and talking with different funders in different ways. So if you have those types of information you're willing to share, please send it along, and we'd be happy to take a look and then incorporate it, as best we can based on the opportunities.
Thank you. So as we end this formal session, I just wanted to note huge thanks to everyone, the speakers, as well as the audience, the conversation, and the folks who've been fielding questions. Thank you. Thank you. We'll stay on, those who are able. We will be pulling all the chat. Some of it's in the slides already. Some of it is not, but we'll work on it and make sure that the information is condensed in a clear manner, and we'll report that back out, aiming for a January. As I mentioned, we're planning the final penultimate in this mini series. There might be additional follow-ups because we are hearing from you of what you need and want. But if you are interested and you want to be on the planning team, this is out of the box creative thinking. How would you reimagine permitting systems? Not to make everybody at FEMA nervous. But just to get those big ideas out there and link them to what they would require so that we can move forward solutions that make sense for floods, for cities, for infrastructure, for tribal treaty rights, fish recovery, ecosystem health. Hannah, would you unpin me and we can see anyone else who wants to be seen and engage in more of a conversation? And again, tremendous thanks. So folks can continue to chat. If you want to unmute, you can also do that and offer your questions, reflections, ideas. And let me see if there's anything. Yep. Thank you, Briar. Totally safe space. Mary Lou and then Rebecca.
So we found that compensatory storage bandwidth requirements by, in particular, King County are problematic. I'm wondering how we can get those changed so that we can move forward, or if you have any suggestions on how to work with the county on that.
Is there perhaps an Ecology or FEMA or other local agent who might have insights?
I can just take a stab at that.
Yeah,
I mean,
thank
that
you.
would be working with your local county representatives to work and change county code. So not all communities have a compensatory storage requirement. That is part of what happened 2008, 2009 relative to the ESA settlement. But to change that in King County, that's a county code. That's not a FEMA national.
Yeah, I know it's not FEMA. I only brought it up because it seems to be the largest restriction we have to doing some of these larger floodplain projects in particular. The problem I've noticed in King County, not only is the compensatory storage, but sometimes it takes so long for them to even determine if the road is their road or not their road. You go through that whole process, which can be years, literally. And then you have to deal with the compensatory storage issue on top of that. So it's been a big restriction for us. That's why I brought it up.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Mary Lou. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to help you find the right people to talk to at King County.
Thank you, Sarah.
That might be an example of like where communities could offer exemptions for restoration projects and specifically, whereas like FEMA national and some of those minimum requirements can't. But that could be like a workaround there, is to kind of work through some sort of exemption process for specific parts of the code that don't really pertain to habitat restoration projects.
Yeah, and it seems like within the code itself in the ordinance, there are exemptions for King County personnel. There's exemptions for tribal personnel or staff. There's not exemptions for nonprofits. So, you know, maybe it's something they could just add to their current ordinances, which would help.
Thank you, Mary Lou. Rebecca?
Thanks. These conversations are wonderful and amazing, and the chat has been great to kind of keep up with, but it is kind of like a fire hose.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I think one thing that I've heard today is capacity, but one thing that isn't being discussed is capacity at your local levels and your local jurisdictions to process and permit these projects in a timely fashion. There's some sidebar conversations regarding the new pilot program under WDFW, which goes from a 45 to a 25 day. And I think, Leif, you said it and I'll echo it. It's my mantra and my motto here at Snohomish County: early and often engagement. But I think that is something that we do need to talk about at some point, because local jurisdictions want to be good partners. We may not have capacity or technical expertise. And so this comment is kind of more for FEMA and Ecology, is that a lot of your local regulators aren't engineers who are reviewing this. We are having to learn this from scratch. We are having to navigate state and federal regulations, which we're good at, But boy, those Fed regulations and their own internal policies and practices are something that are not easily accessible nor relatable or distillable. And I think that that is something that we need to talk about and focus on, is that all the different participating communities are coming at this from a different level of expertise. And not all of us have training or support to be able to make these projects happen in a timely fashion.
Briar?
Oh, I was just gonna say those are all excellent, excellent points. And it's one of the things I worry the most about is we have such a vast variety of community resources and staffing and especially with all this money coming, you know, even if there's the will there, how are we gonna help them move these forward? But I think that Rebecca also outlined one of kind of the, you know, I mean, yes, the maps, the way that we map floodplains makes restoration and reconnection difficult, but also, you know, I've mentioned this in other talks, but when a community joins the NFIP, we don't require them to have an engineer. We don't require them to have, you know, an understanding of the hydrology and the hydraulics, because the floodway was made difficult on purpose, right? You know, if you don't have the staff to analyze it, you should probably just say no. And so therein is a real tragic piece of this, because, you know, if you're working in the floodway where restoration projects happen, you know, so I do hope that one of the things I really hope for from these conversations and from others that we've been having throughout this community is some sort of coming together of those that do have the knowledge, those that do have the resources. And if there is some sort of, I don't know if it's the state or something, but some way to provide communities that support, where a community can say, can I get some help with this? FEMA, you know, we provide technical assistance, both the folks in risk analysis as well as FMNI, but we're, you know, we're a dozen people, you know, and we cover the entire region. So building up some capacity at that mid-level, whether at the state or whatever, to help support communities and what Rebecca is describing, I think would go a long way.
Thank you, Briar.
So just a point of
Dave.
clarification there, FEMA is supporting folks on reviewing no rise analysis now in the region? Is that the current policy?
It's not a policy, but we have always been available to answer questions. And
Okay.
you know, it's, yeah, you know, short of, you know, it's like the CLOMAR is available as the official formal thing, but I think anybody that's been doing floodplain management knows that Ted and his team have been, you know, available to help answer questions, both of engineers and local communities. And then at FMNI, I mean, that's our job. So it's, you know, it's, yeah, we've been available here for.
I'll just say that in the guidance, it explicitly says, like, if a community has concerns with something that they see in a submittal, that they're always welcome to reach out.
Yep.
FEMA is not going to approve anything, you know,
Right.
that is the local community's job. But when it comes to questions related to the NFIP program, what the analysis requirements are, we're more than happy to help provide information to help make things more clear. That is a fundamental thing that we do.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to thank Diane Hennessy, EPA, for chatting in this suggestion. Could there be engineering capacity provided at the state level to specifically review CLOMAR-LOMAR? Federal agencies may be able to fund capacity to do this. This is exactly the kind of dot connecting we're hoping to do through these conversations and more. So state your needs and we will track them. We will try to link them up as you know, not only the normal practice of doing the work unfolds, but with infrastructure funds that are coming. It's incredibly helpful to hear these needs from you and where you would direct additional capacity and even, you know, shared positions, matching funds, et cetera. Anyone else want to offer a comment or another question?
If I can, I mentioned this in the chat, but we'd be interested in hearing about if anyone knows of a situation where we have more than one project, several projects, ideally in a given reach, and it could be over a period of time, but in fairly close proximity, and looking at, could we find a way to do the analysis for the reach and get all of the projects covered. And I can't make any promises, but I'm looking for an example where we might proceed with that and work with FEMA on moving that forward. So I'd be interested in hearing if somebody knows of a situation like that. Please contact me.
Hey, Dave. This is Carol. I was just looking to see, I think Charlotte with the Stillaguamish tribe dropped off, and I think Kristen.
Carol, I think you're on mute.
I hear
I
you.
can hear her.
Oh, you can hear me?
Mhm.
I was just saying, Dave, that I think the Stillaguamish tribe may be thinking about doing that. So I can connect. It doesn't look like they're still on this call, at least that I'm seeing. But I can try to make that connection to you.
Thank you, Carol. I'm chatting to Dave what you said.
Sorry, my speaker shut off on its own. It had a mind of its own.
Other reflections, questions, priorities?
But to that point, Dave, too, I mean, as you know that, and I'd encourage other folks to reach out to the state, because WashDOT, for example, I mean, they're doing a huge number of fish passage barrier removals right now. And as folks know, whether you're doing a 1D model or a 2D model, topography is a huge expense for doing these analyses. And so WashDOT has been collaborating with FEMA in updating zone A's to utilizing newer topography that's available. So I think that right there presents, especially with all the fish passage barrier funding that's coming through, you know, looking at these things from a reach-based perspective, I think is definitely the way to go.
Great. Thank you, Casey. Sean?
Kas, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, been a very interesting conversation. Was disappointed to miss the last meeting, but it was great to listen in. And as somebody who handles policy issues for a very large mitigation program that implements tens of millions of dollars of restoration work across the interior Columbia River Basin, it's the provision rescindment was something that really caught us by surprise in terms of how it's kind of impacting our pace and cadence of restoration across the Columbia with our partners. And it just seems like from a policy perspective, the original provisions were written very specific to the floodway, where an encroachment analysis has been performed, and talked about the level of analysis or work, you know, relative to documenting your impacts to base flood elevations in the regulatory floodway. A lot of our work is in zone A areas or areas where base flood elevations are approximate, but it seems like the provisions made their way into a lot of local development codes. And it just seems with the rescindment of the floodway provisions, it's also put a much more complicated review process in the zone A areas where we may just have a approximate flood plain. And so it just thinks like there could be some, obviously where a regulatory floodway has been done, that's going to be generally more coincident with higher degrees of infrastructure, insurable structures, development, et cetera. But it'd be interesting if we could think about the local floodway administrators may not be as savvy in thinking about these zone A areas where you may just have approximate base flood elevations versus the floodway. And it seemed like with the rescindment of those provisions, it kind of like threw it all out, if that makes any sense. And I guess I'm just sharing than anything, but in a lot of these areas where we're in more rural areas, national forest, higher in the watershed, et cetera, where we don't have a floodway, that you know, we'd have much less impacts on the overall floodplain and floodplain management. So I guess more of a comment and thinking out loud as much as anything.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Briar, do you have any reflection to offer?
Well, I want to make sure that they understand. So, because, you know, the the policy and the issues with H&Hs and clomars and whatnot really are floodway related. So if you're in approximate A and you have no BFE, the community is responsible for kind of monitoring development in that area to make sure that that cumulative 1 foot rise isn't hit. But what problems are you seeing in A? Because there might be a misunderstanding on the part of the community of what they need to require. Because if you've got no floodway, you're in a, should be in a lot easier situation.
Well, and it's interesting, Briar, thanks for the feedback there. Like, for instance, I could send you an email, for instance, like Union County in Oregon, where they'll have a checklist guidance where essentially it gets a little conflated between floodway provisions and then just base floods.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you're in zone A where base floods are approximate or developed by approximate methods or yet to be determined, depending on that zone AE, et cetera, the designation, it seems like some local floodplain administrators are conflating that with kind of their permit application process and checklist that, like, you may have a change in your base flood elevation where some area has been indeterminate and there's no regulatory floodway established. But just going through it's hard negotiating with a county planner that may not have a engineering degree on what that threshold is, because they just see a change. Oh, your application's showing a change in the base flood elevation. Yeah, but we're not in a floodway.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, there's a change in the base flood elevation. So therefore, we're going to have these more extensive mapping, requirements. Last thing I want to do in a habitat project is send information back to DC for review. If I'm in a floodway in the middle of an urban environment, I get it.
Right.
But it just seems like there's a lot of confusion on the execution of the process. A lot of our sponsors that are implementing our work are generally working in more rural areas and aren't as savvy with floodplain regulations. And then there's a wide variety of like I know in Umatilla County, for instance, the last place I was doing an analysis, like the provisions were right in their administrative code. And so I imagine there's a lot of counties pulling all that information out of their code now and trying to figure out how to interpret that. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just observations, and I could share a little of this with you, but perhaps there could be, in these areas where we're implementing habitat restoration, there's lower risk. I just hate for policy decisions to kind of conflate the fact that there has to be a lot more process universally, as opposed to areas where you are clearly in a floodway.
Sure.
So
sure.
Just thoughts more than
anything. That's great. And I would say two things on there. One is my always thing I say is that local communities can have higher standards and we support them in that, and if they want to require more. So that said, that's really important. But the second part of that is if there seems to be confusion, about how a community, thinks that CFR requires them to act, not their own higher standards that they understand and want to do. But if there's some confusion there, you could always bring us in at the region to make sure that everybody understands what's going on, because I doubt the communities want to be, requiring really crazy complicated stuff either if they don't need to. But the A zone can be a really confusing thing to manage. But just like you said, I mean, it's away from urban areas. There's probably not a lot of risk there. The community just might not understand what their responsibilities are. So please, open invitation to bring one of us in at FM and I'll put my email in here, just to make those connections and help. And it's a great outreach opportunity to the communities as well. So
I would love to connect with you on that. And maybe if we had a little work group or some broader conversation around that specific issue. And then if FEMA would consider even, the product, if we could get to a point where there'd be a letter of clarification, maybe in these zone A areas, I mean, that would be awesome. But obviously there need to be more conversation around that. And
I agree.
And, all our contractors, I mean, we're generally doing due diligence on our work. I mean, there's at least, a RAS model, 1D model, looking at with and without project effects, even in these areas, just for the technical analysis of the work. So I'll follow up with you, but thank you.
Great, that'd be great.
That.
Sure.
And to be selfish, if you're game, we would love to be in the loop on that and could support the coordination of that work group. you're not alone, Sean, and others would benefit from hearing some of the insights shared. So we can talk about what's appropriate in a kind of a planning debrief. Maybe I'll reach out to you, Sean, but the more folks that get looped into hearing these conversations, the better. It's just tremendously helpful. So thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. I appreciate time. Yep.
Feel free to raise your hand or speak up if you have another comment or question. Serious high fives to our FEMA and ecology partners for these awesome responses and willingness to keep these comms going. This is really, really helpful.
It's a fantastic opportunity for us too, because like I said, we are few.
Yeah.
But we're here to help.
Yeah. I'll just offer, or I guess maybe I've said it before, but between this link I shared to the governor's salmon strategy and the NFIP comments, these thoughts are all just right on the money for the information we are seeking at Floodplains by Design to be collecting from sponsors and their partners. And so please share your priorities, your capacity needs. No promises. It's a bunch of mystery boxes in our future, but the more information we have up front in an organized way, the clearer we can respond quickly to a request for what do folks need and want.
I will also say that you'll be hearing more from us as we learn more, and we'll be sharing information as it comes out and is shared with us from agencies, as well as conversations we have about how new funds will be allocated, or project lists may be developed, or policies advanced at both the state and federal level. So please stay tuned. Yeah, I think Hannah shared a link to join just the FBD network and newsletter, so we can keep you updated. But yeah, we'd love to share with you more and keep having these types of conversations.
Kas, do you mind if I just throw a quick shout out? I want to say thanks to Leif and Casey for sharing specific case studies. I think these are hard conversations to have, especially when the guidance is new and people are trying to figure out how to use it. And so I thank you. I think it really, it helps get the conversation out there. It helps people have more awareness. And as we work at the region to try and get more guidance out there for the 1D or the 2D analysis, if anybody out there, I copied as much as I could from the chat. If anybody out there has questions or comments or would like more information on any of that, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know there are a number of other kind of deeper dive trainings into how to do that on a technical level. And I would love to hear people's concerns. Safe space, let me know. And then we can work on it. So thanks again, everybody.
And we will pull all the chat and get questions answered that might not have been, and share out that great conversation. Anything else? As it seems like folks are full. Also, to give a huge kudos to our whole planning team who has supported the thinking behind these. That includes Dale, Leif, Sarah, Breyer, Ted, Perkins, Paula Harris, who's currently engaged in major recovery efforts in Whatcom County, Brandon Parsons. There's more in the slide if I'm overlooking it. Casey Kramer, of course, Katie Vanderpool, Sarah's colleague at King County, and others. And just huge thanks. Please join us. You're welcome. We need your thoughts and help in creating a really vibrant conversation. We'll be also seeing what FEMA and other partners have bandwidth to do as far as additional follow-ups, and just really, really appreciate your input. I'll share the recording, the slide decks. Anything else?